Oh hey, it's Wes and Maggie. And today, it's an exciting day, a very late day. We're going to be talking about the not so new Sony A1. And it's funny, even though it's not a terribly new camera, it still remains a highly relevant camera as it competes at the top of the marketplace and continues to do so. So let's jump into it. I'm going to abridge my review a little bit. I don't want to tread in the space that everyone else has already tread on. And I only have a limited amount of time with this camera. I've been shooting with it constantly for the past 2 weeks, got lots of image samples. If you want to see more of those, there's a link down in the description below. If you want to purchase anything you see in this video, links in the description below. Let's do this. Number one, build quality. No surprises here whatsoever. As a matter of fact, very little has changed seriously in build quality since Sony came out with the A9, the original, the OG mirrorless action and sports camera. We have an all magnesium body design, dials and things. They've changed slightly, but not greatly. We've just added a few more options. And here we still have a flippy back screen. It doesn't flip any further up, doesn't flip any further down. Not a lot of surprises here. Slightly deeper grip, feels pretty solid and beefy in the hand. We have some improved doors though. It's not quite as plasticky as before. The buttons have a nice tactile feel. This is all very similar to like the A7R4 and the A7 IV. On the side here we have some plasticky doors. They seal a little bit better than the original doors, so that's nice. But overall, this is obviously not the toughest mirrorless camera available on the market anymore now that we have the likes of the R3 and the Z9. So although I'm not expecting this to fall apart, and we've seen one slide down the mountain at the Olympics and still come out reasonably unscathed, it's not the toughest one. So overall, although I don't have any issues with the way that this is constructed, I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. I don't expect any issues, but I'm not going to be hammering any nails with it like I might with that Nikon. Feature set. Not that long ago, this would have been a 10 out of 10, but then Nikon pushed a firmware update to the Z9. All of a sudden, it's not, but we're close. One of the more interesting features is we have dual purpose card slots in the back here. So what does that get us? Well, we can use our friendly old SD UHS-2 cards or UHS-1 cards, or we can put in a faster CF Express Type A card. Now we can't do the even faster CF Express Type B cards, so we're kind of stuck with a lower capacity, higher cost card, but it gives us a smaller body. Got ups and downs there, but it's neat that you have 2 card slots that both pull double duty. Super convenient. You can save money or spend money. One of the main features of this camera is the 50 megapixel backside illuminated stacked CMOS sensor, which can give you up to 30 frames per second, 50 megapixel compressed raw shooting. That's wild and utterly excessive for 99.9% of photographers. But hey, if you like it, you like it. That's fine. You can also do HEIC, high efficiency image codec files instead of JPEGs if you so choose. But we also have the lossless compressed RAW files, which is one of my favorite features. I hate that on the old Sony cameras you had to choose between giant lossless files or compressed files that can give you a little bit of trouble in high dynamic range situations. This is the best of both worlds. It's great. Thank you. We are missing a feature that I really want to have, and none of the mirrorless cameras have it anymore. None of the high-res cameras, we do not have a medium RAW mode. This used to be one of the main features in something like the D850, where you could shoot at the full, I think, 45 megapixels, or step it down a little bit. Still be a RAW file, but not as many megapixels, not as big of a file. But now with the Z7, Z7 II, we've got the Z9, we've got the A1, we've got the A7R4, all these high-resolution mirrorless cameras, no medium RAW. You're getting all the pixels every time. This drives me nuts as someone who is a wedding photographer a lot of the time. I don't want to go to a wedding and come home with 4,000 50 megapixel files. It's just too much. I don't know if they could do this with the firmware update. I actually have my doubts because it's a lot of data. Normally something like this is done on the SoC, on the system on a chip. There's actually built-in processors specifically designed to scale things down. Otherwise, it's going to produce a tremendous amount of heat and drain the battery because there's a lot of extra processing to take that and scale it down in a reasonable manner without losing image quality. Would love to have that back, but unfortunately it's not there, and I've found that a lot of people just don't care about that now. They're fine with the big file bloat. I like to keep things small if possible. Okay, moving on to my favorite feature on this camera, but it's similar to a feature that we've seen on the A9, that is the silent shutter. For a while, the only place you could get this performance was with Sony, but now Nikon's come out with the Z9. They have an even better silent shutter than the one on the A1. Moving it forward. With this silent shutter here, we can sync flash up to 1/160th of a second in full frame, 1/200th of a second in crop. So syncing with a flash with no moving shutter. But the Z9 can do that up to 1/8000th of a second. But even then, once you bring in the mechanical shutter, I was shocked at how good the mechanical shutter in this camera is. And just to make sure I wasn't crazy, I handed it to a Nikon shooter. I was like, hey, give this a try. And he pulled the trigger on it. He didn't buy it, but he pulled the shutter. And he was blown away too. The mechanical shutter in this camera is so quick and effortless, it's almost like using a silent shutter. It's crazy. So it works phenomenally for studio work, for high-speed sync, stuff like that. It's fantastic. Okay, so that's our photo side for the feature set. And again, I'm just touching on my favorite stuff and biggest disappointments. For the video side, we can go up to 8K 30. Nikon can do 8K 60. Unfortunately, we're lacking one of the greatest features that the A7 IV brought in, focus breathing compensation. Everyone thought that it would come to the A1, but it never did. Is it still coming? I don't know. It's been a long time, so it might be a bit much to expect it at this point. But for me, that was a massive feature because I love the 35G master lens, the autofocus, the rendition, the image quality, the sharpness, just amazing. But the focus breathing is bad, and the A7 IV can fix that. This camera cannot. Eesh. It also lacks the easy video toggle switch on the top of the A7 IV. This camera is a little bit less designed for hybrid shooters and more for photocentric shooters, so I can understand that. But what we do get, and kind of surprises me, we still get a lot of cropping in this. So if you're shooting in crop mode, which a lot of people will do with this camera, one, to reduce the megapixel count, or two, just to get further reach, because you got all those pixels to work with, you can do that. If you're in crop mode already, and then you turn on active image stabilization, it still crops in further. Why does it have to do that? In full frame mode, I can understand because we have a fairly small flange on E-mount. But once you're in crop mode, why is it still doing that? Drives me crazy. Overall though, the video quality with S-Log 3, S-Cinetone, just phenomenal files, but they look so much like the ones from the A7 IV, a camera which costs significantly less. And as far as just the overall video features, we can still go all the way up to 4K 120. A7 IV can't do that, just like the A7S III. And in 1080, we can do 240 frames per second. She's a fast camera. Now, one of the more perplexing choices in this camera is when we're talking about the displays. The EVF is phenomenal. It's pretty much the best in the market. We got 9.4 million dots, very fast, very clear, very large. The back screen, however, is more disappointment from Sony. And honestly, it is bar none, by far, the worst part of this camera is that back screen. 1.44 million dots, 800 by 600 resolution. That is some old school resolution there. When you've got a smartphone with a brilliant OLED display that's at least 1080p, some of them are 4K. Sony makes some of those displays for smartphones. And the one on this can barely be seen in bright sunlight, and it is not sharp enough to clearly see that you've gotten focus. And especially with a camera like this, with so much resolution, you've really got to punch in and punch in again to see if you actually nailed that focus, because it is merciless when you have that many megapixels. And the back screen just doesn't do it for you. So that's really a shame. That back display, I've mentioned in other videos before, is probably worth less than $10 to Sony. A phenomenal, high quality smartphone display that's bigger, brighter, everything more is maybe 40 bucks. We're talking about a very expensive camera here, with the price difference of about $30 that could completely change the quality of that back screen. Eesh. I think they could absorb it. We'll talk about value a little bit later. One of the great features on this, you can do a red focus box. Can't do that on some other Sony cameras, for some reason. You have full-size HDMI on the side. That's a great trend. I hope that keeps up. And although you have strong battery life with the FZ100 batteries, it is worse than every other Sony mirrorless camera with that battery, because there's a lot going on under the hood here. It's making a lot of heat, making a lot of choices. So I wish that they had added a new option for the A1. They can still do this. Number one, to bundle in a grip at a reduced price. That would be fantastic. Some people say throw it in for free, but that's asking a bit much. Number two, introduce a new Sony battery that fills in the entire grip. Now, why do I want that at a bundled price? Because the Sony grip is crazy expensive. It's as expensive as some people's cameras. But give us a grip in a bundle and make a new battery. Sorry, a new battery would be great. One of those gigantic one-piece batteries that has even more capacity than two together. That would be fantastic. And they still have time to do that. Now, another one of my favorite features on this that often gets glossed over is the USB-C port on this allows number one, power delivery charging, and number two, 10 gigabits per second. Who cares? I care. Doing studio tethered shooting, you plug that in with an appropriate USB-C cable, the files are just flying off the camera onto your computer. So like you take a picture, in 1 second, it is fully rendered on your computer, if your computer is fast enough. I'm using an M1 Max MacBook, and boom, those files are right there, fully editable, full RAW file. It's fantastic when you have a USB port that is that fast. Every camera should have that now. Perplexingly though, although the A7 IV can use that port to do full 1080p USB streaming, which is fantastic for, the A1 can't do that. Now some people would say, that's kind of a consumer feature, but let's say I am professionally covering an event that I want to stream. I can charge the camera and stream it into the computer all in one go, one cord. That is a professional application. Or maybe I'm just doing a Zoom meeting with clients. Instead of using my crappy webcam, I can use my A1, but I can't. Just have to do the USB into the, anyway. I feel like they could add that with the firmware update pretty easily. As I mentioned before, for feature set, it would have originally been a 10 out of 10, but since Nikon has updated, they only get a 9.5. Now some would say that there's a lot more going on there, but I consider the compact size of the A1 to be a huge feature, one of the main features for me. Because you can choose to make it small or you can put a grip on it, make it big. That's a great feature. Some people hate that, I love it. Oops, was that the A9? No, that's the A1. So 9.5 out of 10. Handling and usability. So speaking of that, big bonus for handling and usability, that this can be small and compact, but deceptively powerful. Another big usability win is that silent shutter, of course. If you have not used a blackout-free silent shutter before, such as on the A9, A9 II, A1, or Z9, you have got to try it. It is a complete game changer, and you will never want to go back. It is very addictive. Number one, you're not using up your mechanical shutter. Number two, it's just so much more seamless. Number three, you can sneak around a wedding or an event and not make any sound at all and reliably take those photos. The silent shutter in this camera, the Z9, the A1, it is not even remotely the same as a silent shutter in, say, an R5, R6, especially the A7 IV is a kind of a crappy silent shutter. And those other cameras, if you have fast action, you will get warping. If you are in poor lighting scenarios with artificial lights, you can get a lot of banding. Still possible on these, but just a lot less likely. It is reliable, fast, quiet, efficient, and long-lasting. You can take thousands of pictures on this camera without ever putting any wear and tear on it, which is great. Now we do have the new and improved Sony touch menu system, but it's kind of antiquated, especially compared to something like on the Canon where you can access all the controls right on the screen as a touchscreen. This one you can't do that. It's a little updated, but it's still very old-fashioned by like modern smartphone OS standards. We've got the back screen here. It's good for photos, for the most part. Not as good as the flip-out screen on the A7S or the A7 IV for video, but that's a compromise. Now, you've got the Z9 that flips out in a couple different directions, but this one, they didn't put a lot into this flippy screen. Not super versatile. It would be nice to have one of those dual flip designs. And for me, once again, the biggest hit for usability is we're just looking at 50 megapixels raw files all the time, all day, every day. Lots of wins, a few losses, but for the most part, this camera's gonna do everything for you, and I'm nitpicking. It's a 9 out of 10 for handling and usability, for me. If you're used to a bigger, chunkier camera and you can't live without that, that might be a lower score for you. Image and video quality. We've already talked about this quite a bit in the features, but basically, you've got all the pixels, you got lots of dynamic range. The ISO performance isn't quite as good as the R3, but it's still stellar. I thought maybe I could come to a conclusion saying it's practically indistinguishable from the A7 IV but my wife has informed me that it looks a little bit better. So objectively speaking, it does seem to have slightly better color science, slightly more reliable white balance, auto white balance. I find on the a7 IV, they pushed the flattering skin tones a little too far, and you can get kind of a pallid look out of it, whereas this one I find strikes a great balance of realism and flattering and usability in the edits. So I've got to give that a 9.5 out of 10. Again, it's phenomenal, you got everything, but it's slightly behind the R3 in ISO performance. Now, it could be argued that I shouldn't be comparing it to the R3 here, and I agree actually. I don't believe the R3 is in the same class as this camera because it has less megapixels, doesn't have to fight through all that processing. It's easier to have a good ISO performance there. Autofocus, I mean, you know, but do you? We're getting into a weird stage of technology where this is so fast and so intelligent that we're introducing new problems that we didn't have before. And what do I mean by that? I find, especially with this camera, you've got to get the autofocus stickiness right up to the top. And even then, I wish it was stickier, because it can find a new subject way too fast. If I'm taking pictures of someone and they turn and then it no longer recognizes their face, which happens too fast. If there's like someone way over in the corner of the frame and like just their eye is showing, boom, it focuses on that. Like other cameras just weren't capable of doing that, but it will do it. Now where this one falls down for me is that when someone has sunglasses on, or their hair is in their eyes, or they're wearing a mask, which still happens all the time, it won't notice that they're a human being. Some other models, competitors have body or head autofocus, whereas Sony is reliant on there being a real face and eye. And if you don't get that, it's not going to find them and it's going to find other things in the frame. But aside from that, blazingly fast, super precise. It's hard to complain about, so that last part was a bit of a nitpick, but it does happen and is exceeded by others in that respect. Now, it should be noted that, again, the a7 IV, which we're recording on right here, appears to have almost an identical autofocus system, but just not quite as fast. I don't want to say it's slower though, because it is way faster than anything that we used to have not that long ago. So if you don't need the best of the best, like crazy high speed, the a7 IV is going to do it for you. But this one takes it up a step faster, twice as many autofocus calculations per second, and in many ways can be unbeatable. So we've got 9.5 out of 10 for autofocus. Value. This is where we get into problematic territory. This camera is $6,500. When it first came out, it was in a class of its own, clearly, but it didn't last long. Now we have the R3 with fantastic autofocus that easily matches and sometimes bests it. We have the Z9, which according to most people is slightly subpar with the autofocus, but has all the pixels, has the image quality, has all the features and more. Both those cameras cost less. The Z9 is $1,000 less. And again, you can do a lot of the same stuff as this camera on the a7 IV for less than half the price. Is this camera more than twice as good as the a7 IV? It isn't. Is it better? Oh, clearly it's better. But you can get two a7 IVs and a used lens for the price of this camera. And I wish Sony would consider, yes, bundling in a grip at this point, or bundling in something. I am surprised that they have stuck to their guns with this price point. Yes, in some ways it is arguably the most advanced camera, but in some ways the Z9 is arguably the most advanced camera. Is it a phenomenal camera? Obviously it is. But where I am with tax, this camera is just shy of $10,000. And if I were to buy two matching bodies, which a lot of photographers would do, that's almost $20,000. That is an enormous amount of my business. And some people say, well, if you have the equipment to get the job done, you can make that money back. But there are very few jobs that require you to have this camera as the equipment to get that job done. Now, if you're sports and action or wildlife or something, yes, you're going to be able to get things done that other people aren't going to be able to. So, this is a very personal decision for you, but for me, this is a 6 out of 10 for value. I'm sorry, it's tough. So overall, that gives us a total of 52.5 out of 60. How does that stack up? Well, It's number one. It's the A1, but not by a huge margin because it loses out on value a little bit. I wish Sony would push another firmware update to this to address some of the concerns we have with this, because they could fix a lot of this. They're not major issues, but when you're this far up in the market, any little thing becomes a big issue in people's minds because we're in flagship territory. People don't want to be losing out on anything. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about this review, let me know down in the comments below. I'll get back to you on there. If you have the A1, you have any thoughts on that, let me know about that as well. If you want to buy one or want to see more image samples, check them out down in the description below. We've got links there. So until next time, let's go take some photos.